After losing his wife to fever, a cowboy's fate changed forever when her sister arrived. The gunshot cracked through the morning air before Jake Morgan could reach for his coffee. He dove behind the water trough as splinters exploded from the porch post where his head had been seconds before. 3 riders emerged from the dust cloud on the horizon, their rifles already raised for another volley. Jake's hand found his revolver as his heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The day he'd been dreading for 6 months had finally come. He fired twice, dropping the lead horse and sending its rider tumbling into the dirt. The other 2 split apart, circling the ranch house like wolves. Jake recognized the smaller one, Billy Harper, the youngest of the Harper brothers. Which meant the big one was probably Cole, and somewhere out there, hidden in the rocks or the barn, was the third brother, Danny. They'd sworn vengeance when Jake killed their father in a fair fight last winter. Fair didn't matter to men like the Harpers. A bullet punched through the water trough, sending a spray of cold water across Jake's face. He rolled left and came up firing, catching Billy in the shoulder. The young man screamed and wheeled his horse away, clutching the wound. Cole roared with rage and charged straight at the house, his horse's hooves thundering against the hard ground. Jake steadied his aim and squeezed the trigger. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. He threw himself through the front door as Cole's bullets tore through the wood behind him. Inside, Jake stumbled over the chair where his wife Mary had sat just 8 weeks ago, her face pale with fever, her hand reaching for his one last time. The memory hit him like a physical blow, but he pushed it away. Grief was a luxury he couldn't afford with 3 killers on his property. Jake grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace and checked the ammunition. 6 rounds. He moved to the window and saw Cole dismounting, taking cover behind the well. Billy was slumped against a fence post, still alive but out of the fight. That left Danny, and Jake knew the eldest Harper was the most dangerous. Smart, patient, deadly. The back door exploded inward with a crash. Jake spun, bringing the rifle up, but Danny was already on him. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the rifle clattering across the floor. Danny's fist connected with Jake's jaw, snapping his head back. Jake tasted blood and drove his knee into Danny's ribs. They rolled across the floor, knocking over the small table where Mary had kept her medicine bottles. The glass shattered, the smell of laudanum filling the air. Jake's hand closed around a heavy iron skillet. He swung it with everything he had, catching Danny across the temple. The man went limp. Jake shoved him off and scrambled for the rifle's hands shaking. Through the front window, he could see Cole advancing, using the well for cover between movements. Then another sound cut through the chaos. Hoofbeats. A single rider approaching fast from the east road. Jake's stomach dropped. A 4th Harper? He moved to the side window and froze. The rider was a woman, her dark hair streaming behind her as she pushed her horse hard. She looked exactly like Mary. For a moment, Jake thought the fever and the fight had driven him mad. The woman reined in her horse near the fence, her eyes taking in the scene with quick intelligence. Billy raised his good arm, pointing his pistol at her with a shaking hand. She didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, she drew a rifle from her saddle scabbard and fired. Billy's gun flew from his hand, and he collapsed fully to the ground. Cole turned toward this new threat, and Jake seized the moment. He stepped onto the porch and fired 3 quick shots. Cole staggered, dropped his weapon, and fell forward into the dirt. A sudden silence was deafening. Jake's ears rang from the gunfire. His whole body trembled with adrenaline. The woman dismounted and walked toward him, her rifle held loosely but ready. As she came closer, Jake could see the differences. Her eyes were greener than Mary's had been. Her jaw was stronger, her movements more confident. But the resemblance was unmistakable. She stopped 10 feet away, studying him with those sharp green eyes. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, nothing like Mary's soft tones. "I'm Helen Carter, Mary's sister. I got your letter 3 weeks ago. Looks like I should have ridden faster. Part 2 begins here." Jake stared at Helen, his mind struggling to process her words through the fog of adrenaline and shock. Mary had never mentioned having a sister. In the 2 years they'd been married, she'd only spoken of her parents, both dead before Jake had met her. He lowered his rifle slowly, his fingers still near the trigger. Trust didn't come easy to a man who just survived an ambush. "I didn't write any letter," Jake said, his voice rough. He glanced at Danny Harper's unconscious form visible through the open door, then back at Helen. "Mary never told me she had a sister." Helen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Pain, maybe, or anger? "That doesn't surprise me. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. Not since I left home to work as a scout for the cavalry." She shifted her weight, and Jake noticed the way she kept her body angled, always ready to move. This was a woman who'd lived hard and learned to survive. but someone sent me a letter with your name on it telling me Mary had died. Told me you might need help getting her affairs in order." Jake's jaw tightened. Someone had known about Helen. Someone had brought her here deliberately. But who and why? He thought about the handful of people in town who'd known Mary. The doctor, old Henry who ran the general store, the pastor who'd said words over her grave. None of them had reason to meddle in his life. A groan from the yard interrupted his thoughts. Billy Harper was trying to crawl toward his fallen horse. Helen moved before Jake could react, crossing the distance in long strides and kicking the young man's gun further away. She crouched beside him, examined his shoulder with professional efficiency, and pulled a bandana from her pocket to bind the wound. "This one will live if we get him to a doctor," she said without looking at Jake. "The big one's breathing, but won't last the hour without help." "The one inside, I can't tell from here." Jake walked to where Cole lay face down in the dirt. He rolled the man over with his boot and saw the 3 bullet holes clustered in his chest. Cole's eyes were open but unseeing, his last breath already gone. Jake felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse. Just the cold certainty that this wouldn't be the end of it. The Harper family was large, with cousins and friends scattered across 3 counties. "Cole's dead," Jake said. "Danny's inside. Probably has a concussion, but he'll survive." He looked at Helen, really looked at her this time. She wore men's clothing, practical and worn from travel. A cavalry scout, she'd said. That explained the shooting, the calm under pressure. "Why would you come all this way for a sister you hadn't talked to in 5 years? Helen stood, her hand resting on the grip of her pistol. "Because she was still my sister. Because I should have been here when she got sick. Because I've spent 5 years running from the past, and it's time I stopped." She met his gaze directly, no hint of weakness or doubt. "And because whoever sent that letter knew something about both of us. Knew Mary was dead, knew about our falling out, knew you were alone on this ranch. That makes me curious and worried in equal measure." Jake hadn't considered that angle. He'd been so focused on the Harpers that he'd missed the larger picture. Someone was manipulating events, moving pieces on a board he couldn't see. The thought made his skin crawl. "We need to get these men to town," Jake said. "Sheriff Dawson will want statements. Then we figure out who sent that letter." Helen nodded. "I'll hitch up your wagon."
"You secure the one inside?" She paused and added, "I'm sorry about Mary."
"Whatever happened between us, I loved her. I should have said that first." Jake watched her walk toward the barn, her stride confident despite the violence she'd just participated in. He tried to reconcile this hard-edged woman with the gentle, quiet Mary he'd known. How could 2 sisters be so different? What had caused their rift? And why had Mary never mentioned Helen, not even in her final fever-addled days? Inside the house, Danny Harper was stirring, his hand moving to his head where the skillet had connected. Jake tied the man's hands with rope, then dragged him onto the porch. Danny's eyes opened, unfocused and confused. "Your brothers are dead or dying," Jake said flatly. "You want to join them? Or you want to tell me why your family can't let go of a fair fight?" Danny's laugh was bitter and wet. "Fair fight? Your wife poisoned our father, Morgan." Slipped something in his whiskey at the saloon. He died screaming, his insides on fire. "We found the bottle she used in your barn? Had her initials carved in the stopper?" The words hit Jake like a sledgehammer. He grabbed Danny by his shirt, lifting him half off the ground. "You're lying. Mary wouldn't hurt anyone." "She was kind, gentle." "Was she?" Danny's smile was cruel, despite his pain. "Or was that just the face she showed you? Ask yourself why a woman like that would marry a drifter like you. Ask yourself why she never talked about her past. Ask yourself who really sent that letter to her sister." Jake dropped Danny back onto the porch, his mind reeling. It was impossible. Mary had been sweet, loving, devoted. She'd tended to injured animals, grown flowers in her garden, sang softly while she cooked. The idea that she'd poisoned someone was insane, but doubt had planted its seed and Jake felt it growing in his chest. Helen returned with the wagon, and together they loaded the Harper brothers. Billy was barely conscious, whimpering with pain. Cole's body they wrapped in canvas. Danny stayed silent, his eyes fixed on Jake with a mixture of hatred and something else. Pity, maybe. The ride to town took 2 hours. Jake drove while Helen rode alongside on her horse, her rifle across her lap. They didn't speak. Jake's thoughts churned endlessly, examining every memory of Mary, looking for cracks in the foundation of what he'd believed about her. When they reached town, Sheriff Dawson was standing outside his office, almost as if he'd been expecting them. He was a heavy man with a gray mustache and eyes that missed nothing. He took in the scene with a long, measuring look. Harper boys finally made their move, Dawson said. It wasn't a question. Been expecting this. Didn't expect you to have help, though. He nodded at Helen. Helen Carter, she said. Mary Morgan's sister. Dawson's eyebrows rose. She never mentioned family. Seems Mary didn't mention a lot of things, Jake said, his voice tight. He climbed down from the wagon, his muscles aching from the fight and the ride. Danny here says Mary poisoned their father. Says he found evidence in my barn. The sheriff's expression darkened. He looked at Danny, then at Jake, then at Helen. That's a serious accusation. You want to file charges, Harper? Danny struggled to sit up in the wagon bed. Damn right I do. She murdered our pa, and Morgan here helped her cover it up. Jake's hand moved toward his gun, but Helen was faster. She positioned her horse between Jake and the wagon, her eyes warning him to stay calm. Sheriff, I'd like to see this evidence before anyone makes any arrests, and I'd like to know why no one mentioned this to Jake before today. Dawson scratched his jaw, considering, that's fair. Morgan, you're not under arrest, but don't leave town. Harper, you're under arrest for attempted murder. Billy, too, once the doc patches him up. We'll sort out the rest after I investigate. He called for his deputy, a thin young man named Pete, who appeared from inside the office. Part 3 continues the story. While Pete helped transfer the prisoners to the jail cells, Helen tied her horse to the hitching post and followed Jake and the sheriff inside. The office smelled of old coffee and tobacco smoke. Wanted posters covered one wall, their faces staring out with dead eyes. Jake recognized a few men he'd crossed paths with in his years of drifting before he'd settled down with Mary. Sit down, both of you, Dawson said, moving behind his desk. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses, pouring generous amounts without asking. Jake took his and drank it in one swallow. The burn helped focus his scattered thoughts. Helen sipped hers more carefully, her eyes moving around the office, cataloging details. Now then, Dawson began, settling his bulk into his chair. Let's talk about what really happened. Jake, you killed Silas Harper 6 months back. That's public record. It was a fair fight, witnessed by half the town. Silas drew first, you were faster. Should have been the end of it, but the Harper boys never could let anything go. Danny says Mary poisoned Silas, Jake interrupted. Says it happened before the shooting. Dawson frowned. First I'm hearing of it. When Silas died, Doc Miller examined the body. Bullet wound to the heart. Clean kill. No mention of poison. Maybe the doc didn't look close enough, Helen said quietly. If someone poisoned Silas slowly, built it up in his system over time, it might not show obvious signs. Could make a man sick, weak, affect his judgment. Make him more likely to pick a fight he couldn't win. Jake turned to stare at her. You think there's truth to it? Helen met his gaze steadily. I think we need to find out. If Mary did poison Silas Harper, there was a reason. My sister wasn't a casual killer. If she wanted someone dead, they deserved it. The certainty in her voice unsettled Jake. How well did Helen really know Mary? They hadn't spoken in 5 years, she'd admitted that. People changed. Or maybe they just got better at hiding who they really were. The letter that brought you here, Dawson said to Helen. You still have it? She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased from travel. Dawson spread it on his desk, and Jake leaned forward to read it. The handwriting was neat, feminine, but not Mary's. He'd seen Mary's writing enough to know the difference. Mary Morgan died of fever 3 weeks ago. Her husband Jake is alone at the ranch on Cotton Creek. He could use help settling her affairs. She spoke of you often, regretted the rift between you. This is from someone who cared about both sisters and hopes you can find peace. No signature, no return address. The postmark was from their town, dated 10 days after Mary's death. Someone in town sent this, Jake said. Someone who knew about Helen. Someone who knew Mary had secrets worth protecting, Helen added. She looked at Jake with an expression he couldn't quite read. Or secrets worth exposing. My sister wrote me letters for 3 years after I left. I never answered them. She stopped writing 2 years ago, right around the time she married you, I'd guess. Jake's throat tightened. 2 years. That timing was exact. Had Mary stopped reaching out to her sister because she'd found happiness with Jake, or because she'd been hiding something she didn't want Helen to discover? We need to search your ranch, Dawson said. If there's evidence like Danny claims, we'll find it. If not, the Harper boys are liars and attempted murderers, and that's the end of it. Jake nodded slowly.
He had nothing to hide.
At least he didn't think he did. But doubt had taken root now, and it was growing like poison ivy, spreading through everything he'd believed about his life. They rode back to the ranch in the afternoon heat, the sheriff and his deputy following behind. Helen rode beside Jake's wagon again, but this time she spoke. "Tell me about her. About Mary. How you met. What she was like." Jake kept his eyes on the road. Met her in town. She was working at the boarding house, cooking and cleaning. Quiet kept to herself. "We talked sometimes when I came in for supplies. One thing led to another." He paused, remembering. "She was gentle, never raised her voice. Loved growing things, watching them bloom, made our house feel like a home. When the fever took her, she went peaceful, held my hand, and told me she loved me, and then she was gone." "She say anything else? Near the end, when people sometimes speak the truth?" Jake's hands tightened on the reins. "She said she was sorry. Said she wished things had been different. I thought she meant the fever, dying young. Now I wonder." They reached the ranch as shadows lengthened across the yard. The bodies were gone, but blood still stained the dirt. The broken door hung at an angle. Jake felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. This morning he'd been a widower trying to survive his grief. Now he was something else, a man whose entire life might have been built on lies. Dawson organized the search methodically. He took the barn, sending Pete to search the house. Helen walked the property line looking for disturbed earth or hidden caches. Jake stood in the yard, feeling useless and hollow. Pete emerged from the house 20 minutes later, holding a small wooden box. "Sheriff, you need to see this." Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, tied with ribbon. Jake recognized his own name on several envelopes, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. Dawson untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. His face grew grim as he read. "These are letters to Mary from someone named Samuel Carter, dated over 5 years ago." He looked at Helen. Helen's face had gone pale. "My father. He died 6 years ago. What do they say?" Dawson handed her the letter. Helen read it, and Jake watched the color drain further from her cheeks. Her hands shook slightly as she lowered the paper. "My father was asking Mary to come home. Begging her, actually. He says he's sorry for what happened, that he wants to make things right before it's too late." She looked up, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I didn't know he tried to contact her. I thought they'd cut her off completely." "What happened?" Jake asked. "Why did Mary leave home?" Helen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was flat, emotionless. "Our father owned a successful cattle ranch in Colorado. He was also a drunk who became violent when he'd been drinking. Mary and I protected each other growing up. Took the beating so our mother wouldn't. When Mother died, we were 16. That night, Father came home drunk and went after Mary. She fought back for the first time. Hit him with a fireplace poker, broke his arm and 3 ribs.
Jake felt sick.
The gentlewoman he'd known, she'd carried that history inside her, never speaking of it. Father had her arrested," Helen continued. "Was going to press charges, send his own daughter to prison. I made a deal with him. I'd leave, never come back, never contact Mary again, and he'd drop the charges. He agreed. I joined the cavalry as a scout and never looked back. I thought I was protecting her by staying away. I thought she'd be safe if I wasn't there. But she left anyway," Jake said. Helen nodded. 3 years later, according to these letters, Father was dying, wanted reconciliation. Mary refused. Smart girl. Some things can't be forgiven. Dawson cleared his throat. "This is all very tragic, but it doesn't tell us about Silas Harper or any poison." "Actually, Sheriff, I think I found something." The voice came from the barn. They turned to see a woman standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. She stepped forward, and Jake recognized her. Mrs. Caroline Hayes, the widow who owned the boarding house where Mary had worked. She held a small glass bottle in her hand. "I came to check on Jake. Heard about the trouble in town," Caroline said. She was a handsome woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes. "I was Mary's employer and her friend. I know what really happened, and it's time the truth came out. Part 4 of the story unfolds." Caroline walked forward, her boots crunching on the scattered debris from the morning's gunfight. She held the bottle up to the light, and Jake could see a small amount of clear liquid swirling inside. The glass was old, hand-blown, with delicate etchings around the neck. "This isn't poison," Caroline said firmly. "It's medicine tonic for pain. I gave it to Mary 2.5 years ago when she first came to work for me. She had terrible headaches, remnants of a beating she'd taken. Wouldn't tell me who did it, but I could guess from the way she flinched when men raised their voices." Helen's jaw tightened. and Jake felt his chest constrict. More pieces of Mary's hidden past, more evidence of suffering she'd never shared with him. I'd heard Silas Harper bragging at my boarding house one night, Caroline continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. He was drunk, talking to his sons about a sweet young thing he'd cornered in the stable. Said she'd fought like a wildcat, but he'd taught her a lesson. Described her dress, her hair. It was Mary. I knew it in my bones. Jake's vision went red around the edges. His hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles cracked. Silas Harper. The man he'd killed in a fair fight had done that to Mary. And she'd never told him. Never asked for justice or revenge. Just carried it silent and hidden. Easy, Helen said quietly, her hand on his arm. The touch grounded him, kept him from doing something stupid like putting his fist through the barn wall. Mary came to me the next day, Caroline went on, bruised, limping, ashamed even though she had nothing to be ashamed of. I tended her injuries and told her we needed to go to the sheriff. She refused, said it would only make things worse, that men like Harper always got away with it. And she was probably right. Dawson shifted uncomfortably. I would have done my job, Caroline. I would have arrested him. Would you? Caroline's stare was withering. Silas Harper ran half the businesses in this county. His family had money and influence. Mary was a girl working at a boarding house, no family, no connections. Who would a judge believe? The sheriff had no answer for that. Jake realized with a sick feeling that Mary had been right to stay silent. The system wouldn't have protected her. It never protected women like her. So what did she do? Helen asked, her voice carefully controlled. Caroline set the bottle on the porch railing. She asked me if there was anything that could make a man weak, make him slower, less dangerous. I told her about a tonic I knew, something used by cavalry surgeons during the war. In small doses, it dulled pain. In slightly larger doses, it made a man's hands shake, affected his vision, slowed his reactions. You helped her poison him, Dawson said. I helped her survive, Caroline shot back. Mary spent months slipping that tonic into Silas Harper's whiskey whenever he came to town. Just enough to make him unreliable. Just enough that when he finally picked a fight with someone faster and more sober, he'd lose. She was evening the odds. Jake's mind was reeling. Mary had orchestrated it all. She'd weakened Silas, maybe even pushed him toward that confrontation, knowing Jake would be in the saloon that day. Jake was a known gunfighter who'd never lost a draw. Mary had turned him into her weapon, and he'd never known it. That's still murder, Dawson said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's justice, Helen countered. The only kind available to women like my sister. The Harper boys found the bottle in our barn, Jake said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. How did they know to look? Caroline's expression darkened. Because I told them. Or rather, I told someone who told them. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Jake stared at the woman who'd called herself Mary's friend, trying to understand. Why would you do that? Because Mary asked me to, Caroline said softly, 3 days before she died. The fever was burning through her, and she knew she wouldn't survive. She called me to the ranch, made me promise to do something for her after she was gone. She said the Harper boys would never stop coming for you, Jake. They'd keep trying until you were dead or broken, so she wanted to give them a target they could hate more than you. Understanding crashed over Jake like a wave. She wanted them to think she'd poisoned their father. To shift the blame to her, protect me even after death. She loved you, Caroline said. In her own complicated way, she knew what she'd done, using you to kill Silas. She felt guilty for it. This was her way of making it right, taking the vengeance off your shoulders and onto hers. Dead women can't be punished. Jake turned away, his throat tight. Mary had loved him, but she'd also used him. She'd been victim and manipulator, innocent and calculating. The woman he'd mourned wasn't the woman he'd actually married. He didn't know whether to be angry or heartbroken or both. You sent the letter to me, Helen said to Caroline. Brought me here. I did. Mary wanted her sister here after she was gone. She wrote you letters for years, Helen, every week, even after you stopped responding. She kept them all, stored in a box under our bed. Never mailed them because you'd asked her not to contact you, but she wrote them anyway. She wanted you to know she'd forgiven you for leaving, that she understood, that she never blamed you. Helen's face crumpled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked vulnerable. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she turned away to hide them. Jake wanted to offer comfort but didn't know how. They were two strangers bound together by a woman who'd kept secrets from both of them. There's more, Caroline said. Mary left something for each of you. Instructions, actually. She was very specific about what she wanted done. She reached into her coat and pulled out 2 sealed envelopes. One had Jake's name written in Mary's familiar handwriting, the other had Helen's. Jake took his with trembling hands. The paper felt heavy, significant. "I'll leave you both to read those in private," Caroline said. She looked at Dawson. "Sheriff, I've confessed to being an accessory to what amounts to assisted suicide since Silas Harper effectively killed himself by attacking a better gunfighter. Do with that what you will. But those Harper boys attacked Jake today without provocation, and that's attempted murder. Clear and simple." Dawson rubbed his face tiredly. "This is the biggest mess I've seen in 20 years of lawkeeping." "Caroline, you're not under arrest." "Nobody's under arrest except the Harpers." Jake was defending himself. "That's fact. Everything else is complicated moral questions that, frankly, give me a headache. Mary's dead, Silas is dead, and no amount of justice or revenge will change that." He called to Pete, and they headed back toward town, leaving Jake, Helen, and Caroline on the porch. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It should have been beautiful, but Jake felt nothing but numbness. "I should go too," Caroline said gently. "Give you time to process this." She paused at the steps. "For what it's worth, Jake, Mary's last words to me were about you. She said marrying you was the best decision she ever made. Said you made her feel safe for the first time in her life. Whatever else she did, that feeling was real." After Caroline left, Jake and Helen stood in silence. The letters in their hands felt like grenades with pulled pins. Jake looked at Helen and saw his own uncertainty reflected in her face. "Do you want to read them now?" Helen asked. "I don't know if I could handle any more revelations today," Jake admitted. "Then let's wait until morning. Let's take tonight to just breathe and accept that the people we loved were more complicated than we knew." Helen gestured to the house. "Mind if I stay? I don't think either of us should be alone tonight." Jake nodded. They went inside, and Helen helped him rehang the broken door as best they could. They ate a cold dinner neither of them tasted. They sat in chairs on opposite sides of the room, 2 damaged people trying to make sense of a story that had no clear heroes or villains. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. Helen took the spare room that had once been intended for children that never came. Jake lay in the bed he'd shared with Mary, staring at the ceiling, the unopened letter on the nightstand beside him. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of dreams he couldn't quite remember when morning arrived. Part 5 brings the story to its conclusion. Dawn light crept through the windows, and Jake woke with a start, momentarily disoriented. The events of yesterday crashed back over him, and he groaned. His body ached from the fight, and his mind ached from the revelations. He sat up and saw the letter still sitting on the nightstand, its seal unbroken. No more delays. He needed to know what Mary wanted to tell him. Jake broke the seal and unfolded the pages. Mary's handwriting filled 3 sheets front and back. His hands shook slightly as he began to read. "My dearest Jake, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and Caroline has kept her promise to deliver this letter. I hope you can forgive me for the deceptions, though I will understand if you cannot. I need you to know the full truth, even though it may make you hate me. You deserve at least that much honesty." The letter went on to explain everything Caroline had told them and more. Mary detailed her history with her father, the night she'd fought back, Helen's sacrifice. She described the assault by Silas Harper in brutal detail that made Jake's stomach turn. She explained her plan to weaken Silas, her manipulation of the situation that led to the gunfight. But then the letter took a turn Jake hadn't expected. "I know you will wonder if anything between us was real. I have asked myself the same question many times. The truth is this: I chose you deliberately, Jake. I researched you, learned about your reputation as a gunfighter, positioned myself where you would notice me. I needed someone capable of standing up to Silas Harper, and you were perfect for that purpose." That part was calculated and cold, and I am ashamed of it. Jake's chest tightened painfully. To see it written so plainly, to have his fears confirmed, hurt worse than he'd imagined. "But here is what I did not expect," the letter continued. "I did not expect to fall in love with you. I did not expect your kindness, your gentle way with the horses, the way you sang off-key while fixing the fence. I did not expect you to make me laugh or to hold me during nightmares or to look at me like I was precious. I did not expect to want the life we built together more than I wanted revenge. By the time Silas Harper was dead, I regretted the whole plan, not because he didn't deserve it, but because I had risked losing you to achieve it." Jake wiped his eyes roughly. "Damn Mary for making him cry even now. I chose you as a weapon, but you became my home. I used you, but then I loved you. Both things are true." I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I do not deserve it. I am only asking that you remember the good parts were real. Every morning I woke beside you was a gift I never thought I would have. You made me happy, Jake Morgan. You made me feel human again. The letter went on with practical matters. Instructions for the ranch, where she'd hidden money saved from her work at the boarding house, advice on which cattle to sell before winter. Then, in closing, she returned to the personal. I have one last request. My sister Helen is coming. Caroline will have sent for her. Helen and I were inseparable once, before everything fell apart. She sacrificed her future to save me from prison, and I have spent 5 years being too proud and too ashamed to bridge the gap between us. Do not make the same mistake, Jake. Helen is fierce and complicated and damaged, just like me. She will need a friend, and I think you could use one too. You are both alone now because of me. Perhaps you can help each other carry that burden. Build something good from the wreckage I have left behind. That is my final wish. I love you. I am sorry. I hope you find peace. You're Mary. Jake sat with the letter for a long time, reading it again and again. Anger and grief and love tangled together until he couldn't separate them. Mary had used him, yes, but she'd also loved him. She'd been a victim who'd become ruthless in her pursuit of justice. She'd been damaged and desperate and determined to survive. Could he really blame her for that? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Helen stood in the doorway, her own letter in hand. Her eyes were red from crying. Did you read yours? Jake asked. She nodded. Mary explained everything. The assault, the revenge, the plan. She told me about our father's letters, how she'd wanted to reconcile but was afraid I'd be angry she'd left home after I sacrificed so much. Helen's voice cracked. She said she wrote to me every week even though she never sent the letters. Said it kept her from feeling so alone. She asked me to look after you, Jake said. Said we could help each other. She asked me to look after you too. Said you'd need family and we were the closest thing either of us had left. Helen laughed, a bitter sound. Still manipulating even from beyond the grave. But there was affection in her voice beneath the pain. Jake understood. Mary had been flawed and calculating, but she'd also been trying to protect the people she loved in the only way she knew how. What do you want to do? Jake asked. About the ranch? About everything? Helen walked to the window and looked out at the land. The morning sun illuminated the fields, the barn, the distant mountains. It was beautiful country, harsh but honest. I spent 5 years running, she said quietly. Working for the cavalry, always moving, never settling. I told myself I was seeing the world, having adventures. But really I was just afraid to stop moving because stopping meant thinking about everything I'd lost. My mother, my sister, my home. She turned to face Jake. I don't want to run anymore. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay. Help you work the ranch. Learn what Mary's life was like here. Maybe find some peace, like she wanted for both of us. Jake considered the offer. This woman was a stranger, but she was also the only person alive who understood what he was going through. They'd both loved Mary, both been used by her, both been saved by her in different ways. They were connected by complicated grief and uncertain futures. The ranch is big enough for two, Jake said finally. I could use help anyway. The work's too much for one person. We split everything equal, 50-50. Partners. Helen's smile was small but genuine. Partners. I liked the sound of that. They shook hands, sealing the agreement. It felt right somehow, like a new beginning built on the ruins of the old life. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a routine. Helen proved to be a skilled ranch hand, quick with the horses, and unafraid of hard work. Jake taught her the specifics of the property, the best grazing lands, the trouble spots in the fence line. They talked about Mary sometimes, sharing memories, filling in gaps in each other's knowledge of her. The Harper brothers went to trial. Danny and Billy were convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 10 years each. The evidence of Mary's involvement with Silas Harper's death was ruled circumstantial and dismissed. Caroline faced no charges. The town moved on, as towns do, finding new scandals to discuss. One evening, about 2 months after Helen's arrival, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The repairs from the gunfight were complete. New crops were planted. The ranch was thriving again. Do you think she planned this? Helen asked suddenly. Not just the revenge part, but everything after? Getting us both here, forcing us to deal with each other? Jake had wondered the same thing. Mary had been so calculating in other areas. Why not this too?
Maybe, he admitted.
She knew what she was leaving behind. Maybe she wanted to make sure we'd both have someone who understood. It's manipulative, Helen said. It is, Jake agreed. But it's also kind of brilliant. And it's working. Jake smiled despite himself. Yeah, it is. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The ranch settled into nighttime sounds. Jake thought about Mary, about the complicated woman he'd loved, about the pain she'd carried and the choices she'd made. He thought about Helen beside him, another survivor learning to live with the past. He couldn't forgive Mary completely. The manipulation, the lies, they still hurt. But he could understand her better now, could see the desperate woman behind the gentle facade, could honor the love that had been real even if it had grown from calculated beginnings. She would have liked this, Helen said softly. Seeing us here together, making it work. She would have, Jake agreed. Probably would have been smug about it, too. Helen laughed, and Jake found himself laughing with her. It felt good to laugh, to find humor in the strange path that had brought them here. Mary had changed both their fates when she'd married Jake, when she'd enacted her revenge, when she'd brought Helen home. But maybe, Jake thought, maybe some changes were worth the cost. The next morning, Jake and Helen rode out to Mary's grave on the small hill overlooking the ranch. They'd both avoided it since that first day, not ready to face it. Now they stood side by side, looking at the simple wooden cross Jake had carved. I forgive you, Helen said quietly, for not writing back. For keeping secrets. For leaving me wondering all these years. I forgive you, Mary. Jake was silent for a moment, then spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you yet. Maybe someday. But I can thank you. For the good times, for bringing Helen here, for loving me even if it started as something else. That's enough for now. They left wildflowers on the grave, bright yellow blooms that Mary had loved. Then they rode back to the ranch, back to the life they were building together. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. It was better than the one they'd left behind. And that, Jake thought, was probably all Mary had hoped for when she'd set her final plan in motion. The cowboy who'd lost his wife to fever had indeed found his fate changed forever when her sister arrived. Changed in ways he couldn't have imagined, in ways both painful and healing. The past couldn't be erased, but the future was theirs to write. And they would write it together, two damaged souls learning to trust again, building something honest from a foundation of lies and love. The ranch thrived. The seasons turned. Life went on. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right across the fields, Jake could almost hear Mary's soft voice singing, could almost believe she was satisfied with what she'd left behind. Two people alone had become two people together, and that was legacy enough.